Hey there, guys and gals, Adams and Eves, freaks and geeks. I'm ready to up your geek status. This is Mr. Cain here. I'm a part of the Up Your Geek universe. And today, that is exactly what my job is. To give you the latest on all the things, you've guessed it, geeky, from comics, movies, TV, toys, games, books, and more. Are you ready? Because I'm ready. You can check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/upyourgeek, upyourgeekcentral.wordpress.com for the latest on all geeky articles. And you can also check us out on Twitter follow us at upyourgeek. And you can check out this beautiful YouTube podcast where a bunch of crazy geeks gather like the Knights of the Round Table and discuss all things geektastic. Watch the video and subscribe if you like. There will be more to come. Up Your Geek Facebook page is thriving. It's very small, but we're getting larger really soon. So, if you're ready, I'm ready. Ready, set, Up Your Geek. So today's article is going to be about the 10 best superhero comics or comic book movies that have been made. Now, this is just an opinion. Doesn't mean that they are necessarily the best, but the 10 best comic book based movies of all time. Now, this list is barring the Age of Ultron. There's a lot of fan reaction. People love it. Some people dislike it. Some people are kind of on the fence about this film. But we're going to go ahead and go forward. You're probably thinking, why are we doing this when Age of Ultron has come out? Well, if you were a fan and you loved it, then you can understand the list. And maybe because there's a better than average chance that by the time these new films come out, you've got this whole plethora of films coming out in 2016. This year alone, you have going forward after Age of Ultron, Ant-Man, and Fantastic Four. So 2016 will show us Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, X-Men Apocalypse, Captain America Civil War, just to name a few. So what makes a great comic book or superhero movie? Now for us, it's the deft combination of tone, tension, script, star, adaptation of the source material, which is a big thing with major geeks. And if you're a really geektastic person, you know that. So let's find out which comic book movies hit that perfect cocktail in this list of 10 best comic book movies of all time. So I'm going to start with 2004's Spider-Man 2. The studio was Sony, the director was Sam Raimi, and your stars were Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, Alfred Molina, who are Spider-Man, Peter Parker, Mary Jane, and Dr. Otto Octavius, or Doc Ock, respectively. Now, what makes this film great? Though Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film might be showing its age for reasons even beyond the Macy Gray scene, and the third film has been largely reviled since its release for an excess of villains and dance numbers. The second film, not only the strongest of the three, it's one of the most critically acclaimed comic book movies of all time. And it's not hard to see why. Ably captured the patented Spider-Man formula of good-natured fun and genuine emotion. Now, Spider-Man 2 presents both a sympathetic and intimidating villain in Alfred Molina's Dr. Octopus. He was sadistic, but at some point you can understand where he was coming from. And as with all these great genius villains, you kind of see that there's this tragedy in their eyes and in their intent, and they have sometimes the best of intentions, but it just doesn't view that way to the rest of the world that they're villainizing. And this was the best outing for Tobey Maguire in the lead role as Spider-Man. It also includes the most distinct Raimi-esque touches in the scene where Doc Ock's tentacles run rampant at a hospital, and the funny Bruce Campbell cameo throughout the trilogy. That was also great. Now, the standout scene in Spider-Man 2 for me was, Spider-Man single-handedly stops a runaway train and saves everybody on board. Though at the cost of his mask and seemingly his secret identity. But instead of snapping a picture, the passengers moved to see how young Spider-Man is, agreed to keep the secret to themselves. I mean, can you imagine? This was, a major opportunity for anyone to reveal who Spider-Man is. They can sell his secrets for thousands, millions of dollars if someone was after him that badly. But these people decided to keep that. So even though the film was great throughout and fantastic fight scenes with Doc Ock, I mean, that moment captured the essence of the film for me, really, because these people were genuine, and they were thinking, kids were inspiring because, man, he's young and this could be me, and adults were like, man, he's no younger than my kid or no older than my kid. So it's a great sentiment of the film. The fight scene on the train was amazing. Doc Ock was probably one of the best villains of the past decade. And that's Spider-Man 2. So we're going to move to 1989, Batman. I mean, this is the quintessential, film that got people, fantasized about being this character, and though people were reluctant to, accept Michael Keaton. He was kind of break out in this role. The studio, you had Warner Brothers. Tim Burton directed. Michael Keaton played Bruce Wayne Batman. Jack Nicholson played the Joker, whose name was Jack Napier in this film, and Kim Basinger was Vicky Vale. So what makes this film great? Almost lost in the wash between the triumph of Christopher Nolan's Batman epics. More on those later, and then the stink of the two near franchise killing Joel Schumacher entries is the fact that Tim Burton's first effort in '89 is a darn good movie and was the box office phenomena of its day. Though now dated slightly by the, backlot stereolets and by now way too familiar Danny Elfman score and the heavy-handed inclusion of Prince songs. What the hell was that about, by the way? So Michael Keaton's Batman was a surprising but highly credible one, and Jack Nicholson's Joker was just a sensation long before Heath. Now, the film had a high bar to clear in its day. True blue comic book fans were still newly basking in the glow of the original publication of perhaps the two definitive contemporary Batman stories, Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, which came out in '86, and then Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, which was an impeccable depiction of the Joker and his origins in 1988. So the standout scene in Batman '89 for me was Nicholson's presumably improvisational moment of making peculiar random noises to no one in particular before cracking up in the character's famous maniacal cackle. Well, that was my best impression. But it captured the insanity of the character, and it was sort of reminiscent when you think about what The Dark Knight did with Heath Ledger. So moving on, we're going to go with 300. Now, there's 300's a film that was done by Warner Brothers as well, and directed by the amazing Zack Snyder. No biases here. Gerard Butler starred Leonidas, and then you had Lena Headey, who played his wife. Now, what makes 300 great? 300 makes the list mainly in observance of the groundbreaking rule. Aside from a solid script based on a terrific graphic novel by Frank Miller, a star-making performance by Gerard Butler, 300 will be remembered for its innovative use of green screen technology to create an arresting new wholly virtual landscape that provided highly influential in the game and in the genre and in the following years. Because quite frankly, I mean, come on, the giant sized Xerxes in this film. I mean, it was incredible. It gave you that old school comic book feel, where just certain things were colored, and then it, had the black and white points. That was a beautiful depiction on screen. And sure, you might argue that the 2005 green screen panel for panel recreation of that Frank Miller novel, Sin City, came before 300, as did films like 2004 Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow, who used that same technology. But the Zack Snyder directed epic was the first nearly all CGI box office hit, scoring over 450 million at the theaters worldwide, might I add. So it was just kind of, this was actors in a studio shooting on green screen, nowhere else. And I think that's where it stands out among the rest. And now, what's the standout scene? Now, what you were expecting me to say, probably anything other than the defeat of 300, even though you know how the battle will end. The spectacle and the emotion of Leonidas' final assault hits deeply on a visceral level. I mean, making it a satisfying conclusion to the story, as well as an amazing 4 minutes of film. I mean, it also sets up a very satisfying epilogue. So, if you weren't a fan, or if you've not seen it, I encourage you to check it out. Just even for that scene. But the movie overall was great. Moving forward, we're going to talk about X-Men: Days of Future Past, 2014. Coming in at number 7 here. And I'm sorry if I didn't, give you the other numbers. At 8 was 300, at 9 was Batman, at 10 was Spider-Man 2. So Days of Future Past, probably one of the best comic book films of all time. Even with the gripes that it didn't precisely follow story origins, where Shadowcat was the one that went into the past. But given the popularity of films and characters, you can't really do the same things in comic books as you do in movies, for marketing purposes. So Hugh Jackman being the biggest star of the series, obviously they used Wolverine, and made it work too. So the studio is Fox, who's famously been using X-Men as kind of their catalyst. It's their baby. And the one thing that Marvel is angry about giving up rights for because of its popularity, and it's probably the most popular of any of the Marvel series outside of the Marvel Universe. So director Bryan Singer returned for this particular film, as he will for the sequel in X-Men Apocalypse. And he's also directed 2 other films and was involved as producer for a couple of others. So this movie stars Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique, and also Patrick Stewart, Michael Fassbender, Ian McKellen, Xavier, and future Xavier, James McAvoy, young Xavier, and Magneto. So, what makes this great? Fox gave its ailing X-Men franchise a needed shot in the arm with X-Men First Class. And prodigal director Bryan Singer makes his triumphant return with X-Men Days of Future Past, juggling X-Men from both past and future. This prequel, sequel, reboot is not just a master class in comic book movie continuity, but also a tense, over-the-top thriller in its own right. Fans were able to have their cake and eat it too with this film, as Singer was able to bring together stalwarts like Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen and fresh faces like Jennifer Lawrence and James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender, who started in the First Class series. But the star of the show, as always, is Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, as he bridges the temporal divide to stop Mystique from killing creepy Dr. Bolivar Trask, played by Game of Thrones superstar Peter Dinklage, and thus setting off a mutant apocalypse. Now, the film kind of hinged on that, and so it played out really well. Now, the standout scene in this film, don't blink or you'll miss it, and everyone probably know what I'm going to say, but there's a lot of standout action sequences in this movie. Magneto lifting a football stadium using a mastery of magnetism, the future X-Men's doomed last stand against the Sentinels, or Patrick Stewart's giving his younger self a much-needed pep talk. But this movie belongs to Evan Peters, the white-haired speedster known as Quicksilver, as Piotr Maximoff. He frees Magneto from a concrete cell underneath the Pentagon. Director Bryan Singer creates an astonishing, almost Rube Goldberg-esque sequence where a cadre of armed guards are taken out with their own weapons, and a liberal dose of snarky humor as well. Now, we also had Quicksilver used in the Age of Ultron film. Now, because of funny rights issues, they were able to utilize both of these characters in the X-Men stories and tales. As you know, X-Men, Magneto was the father of both Scarlet Witch and Piotr Maximoff, who's Quicksilver. Now, he's able to be used in Age of Ultron because, as a member of the Avengers, there's no connectivity to the X-Men franchise, so they can't be called as mutants, although they were. But then in the comic books, they've kind of changed that continuity, making them possibly Inhumans. Which we'll be seeing in film in the future, and what the show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has been alluding to, and they're actually going to build that series on the show, and then it's going to show up in films such as with Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, and then it's going to evolve into its own film in the future. So that scene was probably the biggest scene of that, but this film, X-Men Days of Future Past, had some large scenes, and it was probably the best film in the series. And a side note, related to the film, it changed the continuity, brought all the people back to life. It kind of erased the events of X-Men 3, which is fantastic, and I'm sure comic book fans around the world are grateful of that. So moving forward, we're going to talk Guardians of the Galaxy at number 6. Guardians of the Galaxy came out in 2014. It's a Marvel Studios film. It was directed by James Gunn. And it has Chris Pratt as Star-Lord, Zoe Saldana playing Gamora, Dave Bautista, former WWE superstar, playing Drax, Vin Diesel's the voice of Groot, and Bradley Cooper as feisty Rocket Raccoon. So what makes it great? After setting August opening weekend record in 2014, it's clear that Guardians of the Galaxy is another in a long line of Marvel Studios hits. But financial success does not a good movie make. So why does this crack our top 10? Well, mostly because it's different. The risk of taking 5 unknown characters, 8 if you count the primary villains, and making them the stars of their own flagship franchise is not a small one. This is a huge studio risk, and studios will stray from it forever because they're just too afraid that they'll put out a lot of money and get no return on their investments. I.e., with Elektra, they created this Daredevil series. Daredevil did, despite popular belief, Daredevil was successful at the box office, and it also was critically acclaimed. Critics liked the movie for its dark grittiness. They criticized some of the film's scenes and shoots, but the actors were impeccable and amazing in this particular film. Now the Fox studio put together Elektra and millions of dollars, and this movie made bupkis. I mean, they made nothing. I don't even think they made their money back. But then you have Guardians of the Galaxy. Man, you have these unknown films, but I think Marvel was hinging on the fact that you slap on this Marvel tag and it's from Marvel Studios, and people will go to the movies and see it. But that's not always the case. So they took a big risk, and it worked. Filling this movie with comedy, with heart, and more than a little bit of dancing was a risk too, and it paid off in spades. I mean, it made it was its own film. It was quirky, it was funny, and it had action. So you've got to know these new characters. For non-comic book fans, they got to invest themselves in a new set of characters that they've never heard of before. So it kind of reset your intrigue because you're used to Iron Man and Thor and the Incredible Hulk and Captain America, Black Widow, but you're seeing these people that you've never seen before, and it kind of resets the intrigue of the non-comic fan, the non-traditional comic book fan who goes to the movie, because now they've got something new to look forward to, and also for the comic fans, because we know Guardians of the Galaxy from the comic books, and even the major comic book fans who know the Guardians of the Galaxies are probably thrilled, but moderate comic book fans or people who aren't too familiar or didn't read the series, they're like, man, this is intriguing, but they're kind of on the fence. Do I like the comics and do I want to see the movie? But it sold, and everyone loved it. So there's no denying that there's something just plain fun about Guardians, or what they've done. It never takes itself too seriously, but always just serious enough. It's about balance and friendship, and about good guys saving the day against the bad guys. It has just enough Marvel Cinematic Universe advancement to sate the fanboys, us included, in Stinger sequence that will finally require way more explanation to your non-comic fan friends than Thanos' grin in Avengers. Anyone else? Because I totally had to explain that to lots of people, and why I geeked out so badly. Now, the standout scene in this film, no scene demonstrates the heart of the film more than a touching moment between Rocket and Groot. When Rocket recovers Groot's splinters, and none captures the fun of the film more than a few minutes later when Star-Lord challenges Ronan to a dance-off as "Ooh Child" plays in the background. That was gold, and it was spot on, it was perfect, and it was nice and quirky, and it fit the style of this particular film. I think that's really what made this film super successful. And hey, they're going to be a part of the MCU, and they're going to get a sequel and probably a threequel, and they're probably going to be in Avengers Infinity War, but that's in the future, so let's wait for that. Okay, so moving forward, coming in at number 5 is 1978's Superman the movie. Now, Superman the movie was even way back then, Warner Brothers owned the property rights to every DC film. So let's take a moment to give a shout out to DC for not distributing their rights to other studios, a la Marvel. So Warner Brothers Studios did Superman the movie. It was directed by Richard Donner and stars Christopher Reeves as obviously Clark Kent. Superman, Margot Kidder was Lois Lane, and you had the titular Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, the pain in the neck billionaire who just was a thorn, a kryptonite thorn in Superman's side, spanning all four films. So the groundbreaking. So what makes this movie great? The groundbreaking rules apply. The groundbreaking rule applies here again, which is why this is kind of like, if you think about Guardians of the Galaxy, that was groundbreaking. So, what I'm saying is that this was a groundbreaking film in 1978, which is why this one gets a nod over 1980 Superman 2, which may have been a hair more fun and probably the best in the series. But Superman was arguably the first true modern comic book movie adaptation and holds a special place in the hearts of an entire generation of moviegoers, not to mention the writers, the artists, the directors, the executives shaping Superman's adventures in various media today. While the special effects are, of course, now clunky by contemporary standards, the John Williams score remains an all-time classic, and the story and performances are solid and endearing in this film. Superman, bought the world. This was a film where you'll believe a man can fly. This is an inspiring story. People were really excited about it, and it sold so well to the audiences and to the fans, not just to comic book fans, but those non-comic book fans. You've got Superman and Batman, and even Wonder Woman. These three, that's why they're called the Trinity. These are the most recognizable characters in history. It's not a when you do the Marvel DC thing, and Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, these characters are the most recognizable characters ever. And I can't say that enough. I mean, if you take a photo of Superman or his symbol and you show it to any average Joe on the street who hasn't read a comic book to save his life, he can tell you that that belongs to Superman. If I then took a character, who was less well known at the time, maybe Iron Man, maybe Thor, and I showed a picture to the average Joe, maybe today because of the films, but a few years ago, you take these things and show them to anybody, even people who've not watched these movies, they wouldn't be able to tell you who Thor was, or Iron Man, or Black Widow, definitely not Hawkeye. And it's it's one of those things. It's Batman, it's Superman, it's Wonder Woman. These people you can show to anybody in the entire world, and they'd be able to tell you who they are, even if they did not have a TV or ever read a book or ever read a comic book growing up. If you saw that, they would know because they've seen that symbol somewhere. It's been recognized. Superman was the symbol of hope long before Henry Cavill said that that symbol meant hope. This is what embodied Superman. This is, Batman, his gritty backstory, and his years and years before, he came to television. of being his comic book adventures and then coming to the screen with Adam West and Wonder Woman, with Linda Carter bringing her to the screen and from the comics. Like, these characters were the fundamentals of comic books. And you may be a comic fan of a different type of character, and you may not like these characters in particular, but you cannot deny that these are the most recognizable characters in the history of comic books ever. We're gonna go to the standout scene in the first Superman film. If you'll remember, the helicopter rescue of Lois Lane atop of the Daily Planet building. In a rare moment of movie harmony, the Metropolis bystanders react to seeing Superman in action for the first time, matched perfectly with a response from modern moviegoers. Pure awe and joy. It was like the people watching the movie who were like, whoa, this is how the people were in the film. Everyone was like, oh my god, it's Superman. It was honestly like, if in real life people saw a man flying above a building saving someone. So it was that great. Moving forward from that, we're going to go at number 4. Now, at number 4 for me, Captain America: The Winter Soldier, which came out in 2014. This was another Marvel Studios. The directors were Joe and Anthony Russo, who, by the way, will be directing the Infinity War movie line with the Avengers, coming out in 2018 and 19, respectively. Now, they're doing that series because Josh Whedon stepped away. So this film, Captain America: The Winter Soldier, stars Chris Evans, who returns as Captain America, or Steve Rogers, Sebastian Stan, who returns as Steve's old friend Bucky, who was believed to be dead in the first film, and comes back as a super soldier in his own right, the Winter Soldier. And also Scarlett Johansson returns as Black Widow, the ever beautiful and ever deadly. So what makes this film great? Captain America: The Winter Soldier is the first film from Marvel Studios to really break the mold of the solo hero film laid out by Iron Man back in 2008. And it's tremendous risk, not just with the film, but with the entire cinematic universe. The term "nothing will ever be the same" is used a lot in comic books, but this might be the first time it's pulled off in a comic book movie. And aside from all that, it just so happens that this is a damn good movie. I mean, for me, this was probably one of the best comic book movies of the past decade. Now, Chris Evans, fully finds his commanding presence. Johansson's Black Widow finds her depth, and Samuel L. Jackson finally gets a chance to truly let loose and be the badass he knows Nick Fury to be. There's intrigue, there's action, there's major twists and spotlight moments for basically every named character in this movie. This is a good one and may mark a real sea change for the way average, everyday folks see superhero films. Now, Captain America was also a political action drama, and people need to understand that. It was kind of the superheroes taking on the government, and it's also actually the catalyst. Aside from what was shown in Age of Ultron, it's actually the catalyst for, what will become the Civil War event. Steve Rogers is wondering why the government needs to have so much knowledge about, or so much power behind them, and what they need to destroy people or to destroy superpowered beings. And the government, as we know, even in real life, always wants to have these things under control if something were to happen. I mean, the real life government, our government, the U.S. government, and even some foreign countries have actual plans if there were a zombie apocalypse, there are actual plans that the soldiers have put together, that, in case that we had some kind of outbreak that turned people into zombies. I mean, come on. My gripe with that is government spending money on such training. If you're not a believer, but if you think that there can be zombies, and obviously someone believes so if they're paying for that type of training. But it's probably basic shelter in place type of training. But this movie, Captain America: The Winter Soldier, is kind of playing on the fact that the government needs to be in control of everything, and then you got this secret government agency, Shield, who's being taken over by this other agency, Hydra, who have evil intentions of taking over the world. So the standout scene in this film, nothing quite says, "Yep, Captain America is one bad mamma jam," or "bad mother, shut your mouth," like the elevator scene, first shown at Comic-Con International San Diego in 2013. The start of the largest scene is where the movie and its real focus takes off. Now, in this scene, Shield agents of various stripes step onto an elevator with Captain America. First, there's an elite strike team members, then men dressed in business suits trying to pretend their conversation is genuine, and finally some large, strapping thug types. And after offering them all an out, Steve Rogers takes them all out one by one, systematically tearing them to pieces. I mean, he kick flips off the shield at the end and puts the exclamation point on the scene. And before anyone can take a breath, the action gets crazier from there, and the movie just explodes. But that was probably the standout scene in the film. It was a small confined space. You had about 10, 11 guys in there, and this one super soldier just kicks ass and takes names, and it was just an amazing scene. Way to go, Russos. So coming in at number 3, the first Iron Man film, coming out in 2008. Now, this was a shared collaboration of Marvel and Paramount Pictures, which is a subsidiary of Disney. And all the subsequent films after Iron Man has actually been under Buena Vista Studios, which is also a subsidiary of Disney. But now they've Marvel has its own film studio, so they shoot a lot of films there. But these are all subsidiaries of Disney. Now the director was Jon Favreau. It starred Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, Iron Man. Jeff Bridges was Obadiah Stane. And Gwyneth Paltrow was in there as Pepper Potts. You also had Terrence Howard, who played Ray Rhodey Rhodes, and good friend, if not best friend of Iron Man or Tony Stark. Now, what makes this movie great? It would be easy just to say Robert Downey Jr. and leave it at that, because he is an amazing actor, kind of quirky and he plays off this character well. Now, but that wouldn't be fair to the film Secret Weapon, which is the director Jon Favreau, who's a great comic book fan in his own right, and actually has been talking about making an Iron Man film because it's his favorite character for quite a long time, and he finally got to get his hands on it. So I know that was great for him, and it turned into gold, and everyone, all the fans drank it like it was all we needed to survive. Now, the movie edges out Winter Soldier due to the original risk he took in changing the way people look at superhero films. Having already demonstrated considerable box office savvy with the holiday hit Elf, which appealed to adults and children equally, here Favreau took what was at the time, at best, a B-list comic book character. Again, we go back to popularity. Iron Man was a lesser known character, but he kind of crafts a story and characters with mass appeal. in this story. Now, Iron Man plays equally well to the hardcore male comic book reader. It does with women, kids, and just about anyone that might not have ever read a comic book before. And he did it all while staying very faithful to the comic books. I mean, talk about a film that followed through with source material. Now, the thing is, Fedorov didn't rethink the core concept in order for it to make more sense to non comic book fans. He knew audiences would buy into the fantastical conceit of the armor and the sci fi elements, so long as its human counterpart made them want to suspend their disbelief. And in that respect, Fedorov came up with Aces with Downey Jr., which was at first an unexpected and somewhat risky choice at the time. And then this was a this was a platform for Robert Downey Jr. to skyrocket his career back into the orbit. Now, the standout scene in this film, it's very first. Downey Jr.'s hyperwit riffing with the army soldiers and the armored jeep right before its attack not only set the entire movie's pitch perfect tone, but immediately placed the audience in the palm of its star, um, where he where he held them steady through the closing credits of the film, and even for a moment after that, because by the end of this film, you were believing that you were believing that that was not Robert Downey Jr. on the screen, and that was Tony Stark, and he's been Tony Stark his entire life, even off the screen. And that's how it had me feeling. I thought it was a really well thought out and planned out film. The film's villain was very great, Obadiah Stane, and a worthy performance by Jeff Bridges. Was awesome. I mean, it was just this, and it's kind of how I look now at how Ant-Man is playing off. You had Obadiah Stane, who grabbed another suit of armor and went against Tony. He wanted to famously take over his company, and it kind of seems that's where the Ant-Man movie is going, if we want to look at it. Where you see, Yellow Jacket coming into play, with a similar suit. So I think that formula kind of works, but the first Iron Man kind of skyrocketed Robert Downey Jr.'s career again, but it also opened up people who were non-comic fans to a new world of comic book films. Moving forward, we're going to go at number 2 on the list is Marvel's The Avengers. Now, we're going to talk about this one as number 2. This was by Disney and Marvel Studios together. The director was Joss Whedon. It starred Robert Downey Jr., of course, returning as Tony Stark in the film. Chris Evans as Steve Rogers, Captain America. Chris Hemsworth as Thor. Mark Ruffalo as Bruce Banner, or the Hulk. Scarlett Johansson returns again as Black Widow, and we see Jeremy Renner get a bigger role in this film as Hawkeye. Now, what makes this film great? While our one-time, all-time favorite Batman Begins got its position because it didn't play like a comic book superhero movie, The Avengers once ascended to the top because it plays exactly like a comic book superhero movie. Now, did you understand all that? Scratch that. It plays like a comic book that happens to be an awesome big budget movie. This is the subgenre ultimately, so far, realized bigger, bolder, and more fantastic than even Hollywood standards. Crisp dialogue, breakneck pacing, seamless special effects, if not costumes. Keep working on the Cap uniform, Disney, please. And we've had several incarnations over the years, so they're getting better. Taking hold and sprinting with the baton that begin with Favreau's Iron Man. Josh Whedon's The Avengers doesn't adapt anything for mainstream audiences. It doesn't or overthink its source material, which is more difficult task than Favreau faced because of the extreme disparate elements. But you also had a soldier, a monster, a god, and a machine. It has to integrate. So all of these things have to exist at the same time. And this is not a comic book, this is a movie. So how does that work on screen? So no, it's not exactly the comic book Avengers in specific detail, but it's 100% pure in spirit. A lot of people had big gripes because some of the founding members of the Avengers are obviously absent from this, and a big one is Ant-Man or Giant Man, Henry Pym, and his wife Janet, who's the Wasp. Now, fans were a bit outraged because they want to see those characters in film. And I have to be honest, I was one of those people. Even though I like the Avengers, and it did work out, and they made these films work with the characters that they have. But I guess they wanted to bring in these characters like Ant-Man, or Giant Man in a different way. It's going to be very different now. There's a rumor that Scott Lang, played by Paul Rudd, in the new Ant-Man film, will become Giant Man in future films. Now, not particularly the Ant-Man film series, but he's also in Captain America Civil War, and there's rumors that his suit will grow. So we'll keep an eye out for that in particular. Now, the standout scene in this film, The Avengers, pretty much the entire third act. I mean, the assembled team battle with the invading alien hordes. And this is maybe the Avengers' greatest of several secret weapons. While many films in the comic book genre labor with their third acts, the Avengers reveals and thrives in it. Ending on such a high note, it should leave most anyone with human DNA wanting for much more. I mean, I didn't want it to end. More Iron Man, more Captain America, more Thor, more Hulk, and definitely more Avengers. I wanted to see everyone again. And couldn't believe the film was over after that. But they put together, barring the exclusions of certain members, they put together a great, great film. Moving forward. So, we're going to talk a little bit about Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. I put this at number 1. Now, it may be at number 1 because it's a trilogy, and 2 of the 3 films were probably the greatest film adaptations of the Batman ever. I mean, ever put on screen. Now, the studio was obviously Warner Brothers. The director was Chris Nolan for all 3 films. It starred Christian Bale as Bruce Wayne. Batman, Gary Oldman was Jim Gordon, who went from lieutenant to commissioner throughout the films. Michael Caine as Alfred Pennyworth. Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox, a key person in this storyline, actually, and a popular character who's recently shown up on the TV show Gotham in a younger version, and who's been upgraded to series regular, by the way, for a side note, and will be returning in season 2 for as much as he can. Now we're going to talk about what makes the trilogy the best comic book based movies of all time. Okay. This is somewhat a cheat, yes, but each film was produced, co-written, and directed by the same person. and tells a cohesive story that, despite Christopher Nolan's claims that he made decisions one film at a time, we suspect were at least mapped out in an outline from the very beginning with the intention of completing the cycle. Besides, this countdown would be a lot less interesting if it were Batman movies and all three qualify. Despite some of the reservations about The Dark Knight Rises, they were great movies. In other words, all three films effectively make up one big production, and what a production it is. I mean, individually, it'd be perfectly understandable if a fan had a favorite comic book film other than one of these three, but considered together, is there any more impressive cinematic achievement in this category? Perhaps in future years, Josh Whedon can string together a more impressive body of Avengers films, but until then, Nolan's modern day masterpiece is the standard bearer, and we suspect it will remain so for a very long time. Barring that Ben Affleck's version of Batman does not supersede these. Now these films will stand alone in their trilogy, and they will be known in history as some of the greatest features of Batman's cinematic history. This easily knocks out the debacles that were Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. And it kind of is homage to the dark style of Tim Burton's Batman and Batman Returns, which did not get mentioned in here, although a great film. Now, this list doesn't mean that these are the absolute best. If I had to go on more with the list, I'd probably throw in Returns a bit, with Michelle Pfeiffer and Danny DeVito respectively playing Catwoman and the Penguin, who put on impeccable performances. And you also had great character dialogue in that film as well, for its time and for when it was released and who it was released to, the audiences. But people loved it after the first film. But we're talking about this trilogy here now. Batman is appearing in not one but two films next year, and he's being played by Ben Affleck. And there's a lot of gripe about Ben Affleck character, or himself playing this character. If you think about it, he's played both dark characters, of both Marvel and DC now. He was the Daredevil, and now he's playing, Batman, who are similar characters, actually. Similar tragedies, and, it's very, it's kind of like, it's great to think about and fantastic that this guy has played these both characters. Some people didn't like him much as the Daredevil, but I think he was great in that role. He's a great actor. I think he's going to nail Batman. Now his version may knock or blow the Nolan's version out of the water, but Nolan's versions will still stand where they are. Regardless of new films to be coming, they always want to have some new and fresh blood to go with these films. Now, we're going to talk about, Batman versus Superman, where we're going to see an adaptation or a loosely based adaptation of Frank Miller's, or it's heavily influenced by Frank Miller's version of Batman in The Dark Knight Returns. Batman has the armored suit, and then there's this, the movie seems to be hinging on that, the world is looking at Superman as this godlike person, And there are people who, at some point have turned on him and Batman and all of his cynicism, as always. And that's nothing that has ever changed in any comic book or film. Batman has always been a brooding, dark character. He's always been a cynical character. He's always thinking on his feet. He's always contemplating things. He's always analyzing things. He's always the very cautious and curious type of person, which is, in my opinion, is why he's survived so long. Especially against people who have powers. Now, this is going to be a great type of film where we've never seen Batman and Superman together. Now, people were talking about wanting Bale to join over into that world, but he wanted someone else to take the mantle, and so I think they've made the right choice. The suit looks amazing. Batman's also going to appear in the Suicide Squad, and also Suicide Squad kind of is like the Guardians of the Galaxy, where you have a well-known Joker, you have a well-known Harley Quinn, but you have these characters who have not been seen in film in a long time, and or some of them ever, and you have these characters who are unknown. Like, not many people know Deadshot unless you're a comic book fan. Killer Croc, Slipknot, El Diablo, like Katana. No one really has the knowledge of these characters but real true comic book fans. But this movie will probably impress people. And they have these great stars in it. So, going back to Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, now let's talk about what the standout chapter of this film, since we did do a trilogy, the standout chapter in this film was the Dark Knight. I would say the Dark Knight may well live on as the consensus critical best of the bunch, period. But we still favor Begins. I still favor Begin. Perhaps due to the expectation versus delivery factor. Begins was the film that rewrote the rules for comic book superhero movies, that its sequel took to another level. It just upped it way up there. So, talking about upping something to a level, we are totally upping your geek with all this information. But perhaps what they say about first love simply applies here. We know that the trilogy played out well. Not many people were fans of Rises. There was complaints of the story, the character development in that film, and there were a lot of things that people found a bit off. Begins played out like this perfect film. This first love perfect film. You didn't get Batman too quickly in the film. It started out with a lost Bruce Wayne. Told his tale of tragedy coming from that. His parents were murdered. He went through this phase in his life where all he wanted was revenge, and this was kind of the catalyst for him becoming Batman, obviously, and everyone knows that. But he kind of came out of that. He went away, he did some things. There were some things, I guess, that were left to the imagination of what he'd been through, but he had been gone away for 7 years. And it's almost akin to what happened in The Dark Knight Rises, where he was already Batman, but, he had left at the end of The Dark Knight, to be chased or hunted down by the police, because he took on a responsibility of being involved in the death of Harvey Dent, and they wanted Harvey Dent to go out as a hero and not the villain that he had become in Two-Face. So he returns 8 years later in The Dark Knight Rises. So he had these two films similar on each end. And Begins, he goes away for 7 years. He trains. He becomes this with the League of Shadows. He becomes this ninja master martial artist. And that's where he meets Ra's al Ghul and becomes this great fighter. And he takes a bunch of the weapons from there and he incorporates them into his suit when he does develop into Batman. But this film also was very smart. Batman, and coming up with this, he created the Batarangs. He, sanded them down from weapons and materials. He didn't make the cave up too much with electronics. It was really a cave where he set up electronics, and also there was a kind of a feeling of this is what it would be like, or this is what it would look like if a real person became Batman. And that's, I think, what people fell in love with about that film. It's certainly what I fell in love with. This was not just this fantastical idea of this man becoming this hero. It was an idea of, man, I could do that if I was a billionaire and if I was in shape like that man. So he ordered cows, and there's these little moments in the film. Let's order Alfred goes, we should order them in bulk so people won't get suspicious, because why are you ordering just one? And that's great writing. That's just great writing and great thought. He ordered all the ears were mounted onto these, and all the suit came together piece by piece. The ears are mounted on to the helmet, and they had earpieces in them, and he could make this thing. And the suit was made from a spelunking suit, and if for those who don't know what spelunking is, it's for cave diving. I mean, he had he wore a cave diving suit that was built at his Wayne Research and Development department, and that became part of his suit. I mean, tell me that's not amazing. When you think about it, I mean, he took these pieces and he put them all together. He incorporated the blades from his League of Shadows days, and he just kind of brought everything together, and he was incredible with that. And that was great writing and great storytelling. And then the ultimate suit came together. The memory cloth cape. They kind of gave you a reason to believe that these things could actually be real and could actually take place if someone were to do so. And that's why that Begins was probably just one of those great films like that. And then The Dark Knight. Okay, I had my origins. I've developed, I have all my gadgets. My house was blown up, sure, but I have this underground facility now. I have more help, and people in my corner, and people that know my secret that are helping me out, like Lucius Fox, who are helping me to develop these things. He used a army tank or vehicle that he used as the Batmobile, and it wasn't like in a traditional Batmobile. You just had this. It was this tank painted black. There was no bat symbols or signs on it or anything, but it was this military weapon. So I think that was great the way they did that. Now in The Dark Knight, it upped the ante 1,000, especially with Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker. And in my opinion, he was a very distinct Joker and put on a greater performance than Jack Nicholson did as the character. But this movie could have easily been called The Joker, starring just Heath Ledger. I mean, he was incredible. The action sequences in this film was amazing. The story development was amazing. There was this mystery about who this character was and who this Joker was, and no one knew. He had no history, and that was there was like a tragic and sad truth about it, and we know that he told these stories. If you wanted to know how he got those scars, and then he told different stories every time he said it. But it was this sadistic man, and a key moment in that was when he's talking to Harvey Dent. He's like, I don't have a purpose really for doing things. I just do them. Yes, because he's like, I'd be like a dog chasing after a car. I wouldn't know what to do with it if I caught it. Like he is, he put on this amazing, and he played sadistic well. Unfortunately, he passed away way before he met his potential, in his film, in Heath Ledger, but those films were the greatest. Now, The Dark Knight Rises was not the greatest film in the series. I will admit that, but it did serve a greater purpose in the trilogy, and it kind of went back to its origins. I mean, you had Talia coming in trying to finish what the Ra's started in the first film, and she kind of shared that vision, and the plans were foiled. You also had Catwoman, you had Bane, who was Tom Hardy was incredible as. Even though people complained about being hard to understand him, it was still an effective film. People complained that he was this badass up until the point where Miranda was revealed to be Talia, and then he turned into this, less than type of supervillain who was taken out by Catwoman. But that's neither here or there. So, I want to tell you that I'm signing off. This is Mr. Cain, with the Up Your Geek Nation. You can again check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/Up Your Geek. You can follow us on Twitter at Up Your Geek. You can also check out our Up Your Geek podcast on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, look for Up Your Geek. You can also check us out on for news articles on all things geeky on upyourgeekcentral.wordpress.com. That is our official website. So, until next times, my friends, this is Mr. Cain signing off. And remember, always up your geek. Oh, wait a minute. One quick note, guys. I have to add, earlier in this podcast, I called, when we were discussing Iron Man, I called Ray Rhodes, Ray Rhodey Rhodes, and I meant to say James Rhodes, so that was a mistake on my part. Slip of the tongue. I was thinking about football at the time. But rolling back into this, even though I ended the podcast, I just wanted to add an addendum here. That is, missing from this list was Man of Steel. Man of Steel was missing because Man of Steel is kind of a special thing for me and for a lot of people, and there, a lot of mixed reaction, but the overall consensus is that it was a great movie, and this was one of the great superhero movies, and for me, it was probably the best of the year 2013, and I'm going to talk a little about that right now. So, addendum to this movie list. And we're going to talk about how Man of Steel inspires, even as it divides. Man of Steel reminds audiences and diehard fans of Superman's moral authority. And let's, talk about some things. So, there's something oddly fascinating to me about the volume of passionate online discussion over the climax of Man of Steel. As if this hasn't been talked about enough, but this is the part where I tell you that if you haven't seen Man of Steel and want to stay unaware of how the movie's big climactic battle ends, you should probably stop listening right now. Okay, warning provided, even though it's been nearly 2 years. So, If you haven't seen it, I don't know what's wrong with you. So anyway, so that discussion, or to be more accurate, the one dominant complaint from a sizable and vocal contingent of Superman fans that others have attempted to counter to very little effect, a little more prominent now that there's 2 years of gathering and discussing this particular scene in the film. This centers around the fact that, again, spoilers if you're listening, Superman, in order to win his battle with Zod, breaks the villain's neck. Now, this one action, in many people's eyes, invalidates in any and all ways the entirety of Man of Steel as a Superman story. Never mind a good Superman story. Now, the thinking behind those complaints is somewhat, the absolutists out there. Superman never ever kills, goes their argument, no matter the circumstance. In fact, the entire point of Superman is that he always finds a way to avoid that solution. And, you also kind of get that with, Batman. While we're discussing it. But, as a longtime fan of Superman, I definitely find myself drawn toward the idea, if only because it fits so well with the notion that Superman is, at his core, a kid's character who, in addition to his superpowers, can personify that kind of rigid, or rigid moral code. And yet, I'm also drawn toward the explanation offered by the filmmakers that, as Man of Steel is an origin story for Superman, and the killing here presented, at least in their eyes, as something unavoidable in order to prevent further destruction and threat to human life. It's the fundamentals of what humans would carry upon themselves. If you're a human being and you live in this world, those soldiers that fight in the army, if there's a child or family in danger that they're trying to protect, and the only way to stop that, those people from getting harmed, is to kill someone else. There you go. It's the greater good. And these are things that are the standards. I, and any situation where someone is depicted as a hero, you will do whatever it takes to save the lives of others, if that's what you're in it for. Now, this is clearly something that people had a gripe about, but the filmmakers did give a very good explanation about that, and it's true. It was an unavoidable situation. He didn't want this family to be killed by Zod. He was done with the destruction. He was done with the killing. He wanted it to end, and that's was his only solution. Now, there was a very distinct part of that scene where he struggled with doing that. And people seem to ignore some of that. But even if they do acknowledge it, they kind of pile it on with more complaining. And it's just wrong. Take the movie for what it is. It was a great way and a new take on Superman and his origin story, while leaving fundamental keys of who that character is. Um, you know, this is, so, filmmakers presented that, this was an unavoidable situation. There was obviously a threat to human life there, and Superman felt he had to protect it. This acts as an origin of Superman's decision to never again take a life. Now, not many people think about that, but this is, in true effect, an origin tale. So Superman just starting out as Superman, being a hero for the first time. Look, his first day on the job. He's had these powers for a long time, sure, but this is his first time putting them into effect to save people. So his saving of lives and fighting against these supervillains are also an origin. This is his first time around, so that the second time around, he knows that he can go and fight in a designated area where he can cause less destruction. This is like your first day on a job. Your first day on a job, you're not fantastic, are you? Not at all. So this is an origin to his decision to never take a life again. So I had to take Zod's life, even though he was this evil man who wanted to do nothing but kill and cause pain. I had to kill him. He struggled with that. After he snapped his neck, he fell to his knees. He cried. He was in pain because he didn't want to do it, but he knew that he had to and had no other choice. In that Man of Steel's, Superman is clearly aimed at older viewers as well. The movie is rated PG-13, and it's a more dark and character. And I guess it's kind of a fresh take on what people were actually looking for out of the character, to be honest. After all, the idea that there's actually some reason and experience behind Superman's strict moral code beyond "that's not what I do" makes sense to me. And it's placed the new Man of Steel at the center of the cinematic trend towards angst-ridden, flawed heroes in a way that a traditional Superman could never have managed. I mean, this wouldn't have flew in a no pun intended, in the movie with starring Christopher Reeves, say in 1978. Beyond the substance of the debate, just the fact that there is any sense of discussion about a summer blockbuster movie's morality or plot at all, beyond pointing out the various ways in which it doesn't make sense, of course, feels like something of a rarity. But what's particularly fascinating about this to me is that instead of simply writing off the finale as a bad decision or laziness, certainly, I don't think Man of Steel really sells the idea that Superman had no other choice than to kill Zod. Yeah, there's the sense among those aggrieved that the character himself has been betrayed by the movie in some way. I'm reminded of the controversy that erupted in comic book circles, around when this film came out, when DC Comics announced that Orson Scott Card was to co-write a story launching a new Superman series. Fans responded with horror at the idea that such a well-known opponent of gay rights and gay marriage would be allowed to write Superman, even going so far as to organize a petition to have him removed from the story. In the end, the artist of the story stepped away from the project because of the negative publicity it had attracted, effectively leaving the project in limbo. Which I find absolutely ridiculous. Like, what does this nation come to? We've come so far, yet we're still steps and for me, miles behind. Um, so I mean, moving on. The Superman story wouldn't have been Card's first comic book work. However, a few years earlier, he had written two well promoted Iron Man series for competitor Marvel Comics without attracting anywhere near as much outrage. Again, speaks to the popularity of the characters. Superman, a fundamental. More popular, more well-known character than Iron Man will ever be. This seeming discrepancy was explained away by some saying that Superman stood for compassion, tolerance, and fairness in a way that no other superhero did, and was therefore more needing of curation that kept the character away from such bigotry and small-mindedness. Seeing the upset in the response of Man of Steel, that idea sticks with me. Superman holds a strange place in the hearts of many, it seems. He may be a fictional character, but he's nonetheless someone that we look up to and expect more from than we do other such unreal constructs. You know, we want to represent something purer than other characters, an ideal for us to aspire to, perhaps. More than record breaking opening weekends and more than response from critics or anything about the actual movie itself. That's what Man of Steel has done for Superman. Reminded us how important it is as an idea and inspiration to us, even 75 years into his career. Uh, 75, 76, and now 77. So he's grown so much and grown with everyone, and he will be for years to come. So that's my piece on Man of Steel. I just wanted to mention that because I know I didn't put him in the top 10 list, but it's a special sort of film that is probably leagues ahead of most of the movies in that list. So now, officially signing off. I hope that you enjoyed the knowledge. Look for more podcasts to come. And remember, continue to up your geek.